I mean, I think the Tory party are falling into the trap that the left has done, which is to close down debate completely. And the best way of dealing with this is to regard them as ridiculous and laugh at them.
I found this quite shocking. I think Asma did as well. This is about Annalise Dodds. She didn't find it that shocking, but this is what happened to Annalise Dodds over the weekend.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Annalise Dodds, you can't hide! You support genocide! Annalise Dodds!
You can't hide, you support genocide. We played that clip to Annalise Dodds, and she was relatively inured to it.
Well, to be completely honest with you, obviously I've seen many different protests over the years. I think my main concern was that this was on a really busy street, and I've been inside a fantastic business, and it obviously wasn't particularly fair on the people who are working there to have to deal with that kind of thing. But as I say, I've seen many different protests over the years. This one was a bit unusual because we had different groups clubbing together. It seemed there was a bit of a kind of jamboree going on there. But yes, I think I'm quite used to this kind of thing now.
So you don't feel threatened? You can just ignore it.
I personally don't, but I have to say that it's really important that nobody should ever feel threatened, and I think above all we need to make sure that politics is something that everyone who is interested in can actually engage in.
John, I wouldn't be an MP for all the tea in China. She thinks that's kind of part of the job. I thought that was a fairly despicable thing to shout at someone. And the question is, there's two questions, I suppose, John. Why would anyone be an MP? And has it ever been thus, or are things getting worse in that respect, in your view?
I thought she was incredibly cool. It was an amazing response. Yeah, it was nasty what they're saying, but MPs are thick-skinned, aren't they? They have to be, and they have to take abuse, and they hand it out themselves too. As we know, in the Commons, it's highly confrontational. They're all screaming at each other all the time. So I guess they're used to it. And I think you do as an MP. I mean, if we want free speech, you're going to get abuse. I mean, you just have to accept that. And that wasn't an awful large number of people, from what I can gather, and shouting stupid things. But that happens, and you have to deal with it. And I think she was admirable in the way she dealt with it. And like you, Stig, I would not be an MP. I mean, it takes a certain sort of person, doesn't it? They're essentially risk takers, and they're very interested in power. And of course, we were neither of those, Stig.
Well, John, I refuse to accept about your lack of interest in power, but we'll talk about that another time. But is it wrong, though, John? Do we end up with a certain type of MP for that reason? I mean, this is a good point. Why would you be an MP? It will attract a certain type of person, which that might then make the situation worse, and then we end up with a body politic that's not that healthy.
Yeah, possibly, but at the same time, they do have to be thick-skinned, and we have blushing violets coming in, and be in tears all the time. That'd be hopeless. They need to be quite tough people, and I'm not sure how you change this. So you accept the fact that certain people will go into politics, and I still think a lot of people want to go in despite the abuse they get. So when I was editor of the Times, people came to me and said, we've got to do things to try and encourage more people to go into politics.
Yeah.
And I said, it's not something a newspaper could really do. People either want to do it or they don't. We're not going to have some sort of training camp to encourage people to go into politics. It will find its natural level, and it'll attract a certain sort of people, and that's just a fact. And I don't think we can change it.
Ashley, Lisa suggested that you might want to become Prime Minister with your thoughts on mental health. Would you like to be an MP?
Absolutely not. I definitely, same sentiment with me. You couldn't pay me enough to do that job. I'm sympathetic to some of the fears that MPs have been expressing. It's not nice to get these kinds of threats. I have like a small fraction of like the notoriety they have, and I get like scary threats on a fairly regular basis. But I have to remind myself it comes with the territory. You put yourself out there and you say, you speak about what you believe in, even if it pisses people. Oh, excuse me. Even if it makes people angry.
You can say that.
We don't mind that word.
We believe in free speech here on Times Radio.
Sorry, you can take the girl out of the ghetto. Anyway, even if it makes people angry, you kind of have to accept that. But what I found very interesting is, as I've been listening to this sort of debate unfold, I have noticed a kind of gradual segue into the misinformation and disinformation kind of panic, where it's like, not only is protesting outside Parliament potentially dangerous, not only is protesting outside MPs houses potentially dangerous, which, you know, we already have potentially certain laws that ensure that these things don't go out of control. You know, you can't like sort of threaten violence on people. That's already dealt with. But the sort of wanting more and more police powers and then slowly kind of gradually saying, well, also we have this problem with misinformation and disinformation online, and this is a threat to safety of MPs. And so now controlling information online becomes a safety issue, becomes a really, you know, do we have free speech when it comes to misinformation and disinformation? Surely we should care about the lives of, and then they'll sort of talk about, you know, the horrible things that have happened in the past and link this to disinformation. I think that's very insidious and we should be worried about that.
John Witherow, do you accept and agree that there is a distinction? Lee Anderson talked about a specific individual. Suella Braverman seems to be talking about the whole of the country, even though some of the examples that Mark Harper was just talking about there were more local.
No, they've got themselves into a real twist here, haven't they? I mean, I suppose you can argue it was an ad hominem attack on Sadiq Khan and therefore personalized, and the rest of it was too generalized. But look, they're both untrue and silly comments. And I always think if we're going to have this free speech debate, those comments should be accepted and laughed at and dismissed, rather than how should they be censored. I mean, I think the Tory party are falling into the trap that the left has done, which is to close down debates completely. And the best way of dealing with this is to regard them as ridiculous and laugh at them.
The problem, I suppose, that's an interesting way of looking at it, John. That the problem is that there are some people, and we don't know how many people, but we've had people getting in touch with us who agree with what Suella Braverman said, who agree with what Lee Anderson said. Well,
of course, they'll always find some agreement. But it's not a fact that Islamists have taken over the Mayor of London's offices or the country. I mean, they're a small minority, as we know, of activists. They're certainly not running things. And people worry about these things. In a sense, it underlines the broader debate that people are worried about parts of the country being taken over by Muslim majorities. And that's the underlying cause of, I think, of grievances here. Not the silliness about the idea that Islamists are running the place.
Ashley, do you agree that we should just have this debate without trying to censor people?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, these comments were stupid. He was mistaking and misreading and the sort of tiptoeing around certain groups and a fear of causing offense for a literal conspiracy where those groups have taken over government. I mean, that's a very common thing. You see this with like cultural Marxism and so on. But sort of saying, you know, overblowing things and saying, how dare you say that? It only feeds those conspiracies because people say, you've touched a nerve, haven't you? The solution is to have more open debate about why policymakers feel a certain amount of reticence to criticize certain groups, to talk openly about problems, even if like they're mistaken, you know, that for instance, there's a problem of Islamism in the UK. Well, let's have an open conversation about that. I think the solution to bad information and bad speech is more speech.